think it's working now. Good. Okay. All right. Hello, PreCalc students. This is the week of 4/20, 2020, and we're doing some indifferent formula for this week, and a few other miscellaneous review. So there's going to be two videos. First one's going to be a little bit larger, covering some indifferent, a few different examples of how you'll see it. And then the second video is going to be kind of like a spiral review of a few other things. And that video, at the end of that video, is where you're going to have your homework. So I will not be showing you homework at the end of this video, rather at the end of the second video. Okay, so this is the first video you should be watching. All right, so let's think about, so I put the formula up here for the sum and difference. So the way you read this, be careful. If I'm looking for the cosine of two things, right? The cosine of, I don't know, the cosine of 15 plus the cosine of, 45, okay? For example. So if I'm adding those two, you're looking at the addition sign right there. Then in the following equation, in the rest of the equation, you're going to be using the top one. So if I'm adding, I'm going to use the top one. So actually, I'm going to be using subtraction here. Whereas if I was doing cosine of 135 minus 40 cosine of 45, for example, if I was doing a minus here, I would be using the plus there. Okay, so it's like top to top, bottom to bottom. That's the one confusing part about it here. With the sine formula, it's a little bit easier because it's plus to plus and minus to minus. So that really makes sense. Tangent, I don't think I'm going to be showing you a tangent one on this example, but just in case I have that there too, it's pretty straightforward. You just follow the formula, plug it in, and you're done. So when are we going to need this, for example? Let me show you guys an example. I want you guys to find the sine of 105. So you're going to say, find the sine of 105. But don't want you to use a calculator. So you're not just going to punch it into a calculator. That'll take 2 seconds. It's not a problem. So here's what we're going to do, actually. Wait, listen to this. There we go. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. The sine of 105. Oh, simple. Let's just use our unit circle. Sine of 105. Yeah, we don't have 105 degree here. We have 90 degree, we have 20 degree, but we do not have 105. So what are we going to do? Well, there's a few different ways to do something. But what adds up to 105 of the degrees where we do know the sine and cosine of off the unit circle, or what subtracts? So in this case, I'm going to use two things we know. I'm going to use 135 and 30 degrees. I'm going to use those two. And clearly, I'm going to be subtracting them. So I'm going to say the sine of 105 is equal to the sine of, sine of, that'll be a 135 minus 30 degrees. Okay? So 135 minus 30 should give us 110. So if I want to find the sine of 110, I have to do sine of 135 minus 30. Now, how do we do that? Well, let's follow the formula. That's the formula right there. Okay, and since we're subtracting, we're going to have to use the subtraction right there, so let's keep that in mind. So sine of A, that means the sine of the first one. So sine of 135 times cosine of B, which is the second one. So I'll write here cosine of 30 minus, because we're using minus here, cosine of A, so cosine of the first one, so that's cosine of 135 times the sine of B, so the sine of the second one, the sine of 30. All right, now let's refer to our unit circle to find the sine of 135. Let's see here, 135, where are you? 135, you're right here, and the sine of 135 is root 2 over 2. Okay, that's going to be root 2 over 2 times the cosine of 30. Cosine of 30 is root 3 over 2. Okay. Okay, now subtracted by the product of cosine of 135, cosine of 135, which is negative root 2 over 2. Root 2 over 2 times the sine of 30. Where is that? There's the 30. Sine of 30 is 1/2. Okay. 1/2. All right, so now that we got that part done, let's actually work this out. And this should be the easy part. 2 times root 3, that is root 6 over 4 minus negative root 2 times 1 is going to be negative root 2 all over 4. The negative multiplied with that is going to give us, I'm going to erase that and make that a positive. And so now we can add them. They're actually common denominator already. So that's going to be root 6 plus root 2 all over 4. If I could simplify those radicals in any possible way, I would, but I can't with root 6 and root 2, so I'm just going to leave them like that. It's root 6 plus root 2 all over 4. Please be careful. I've seen some students make the algebraic mistake of trying to simplify this by 2 and this by 2 and this by 2. That's a 4. That's great. That can be simplified by 2. But this is not a 6, it's a root 6. Keep that in mind, okay? So you can't just go ahead and do that. Now, if I were to simplify this and somehow I got a 2 on the outside, yeah, I could simplify 2 to 4 and whatever's on the outside here. But again, these cannot be simplified any further. They're done. If you want to know the exact value of this, I mean, you could always go try it with a calculator. You can do root 6 plus root 2, whatever that is, and then divide it by 4. But again, you're not going to get an exact answer. This is the most precise answer, and this is how I want you to leave the answer, okay? So that right there would be the sine of a 135. Cool. All right, let's erase this now. So take a picture of that or whatever if you need to. And I'm going to give you another example now. Why don't we do a cosine? Let's do a cosine problem. Okay, we're going to do, how about this? Cosine of 165. Okay, and we have to think, what are we going to do to get cosine of 165? It's a couple different ways. Maybe there's a way to do a subtraction. Maybe there's a way to do an addition. Well, I'm going to use something that's a little bit obvious here. I'm going to use 120 plus 45. That's like the first thing that comes to my mind is 120 plus 45. So we're using cosine. So we're going to do cosine of 120 plus 45. Now, would it matter if I did cosine of 45 plus 120? It wouldn't. Just make sure which one's your A, which one's your B, your first and second one. You just have to plug it in correctly. I could show it to you. We'd end up with the same thing anyways. I don't want to waste your time. Okay, so this is going to be equal to, let's look at it, cosine of A, cosine of that first one, times the cosine of B, so that would be the cosine of the second one. Now, here's where it gets interesting. That's a plus. There's the plus on top. That means I have to do what's on top. The operation on top is a subtraction. That's why that has to be subtraction, okay? That's the part students get confused. Sine of A, so sine of 120 times sine of B, which is the sine of 45. Okay, and let's do this fast. We need 120 and we need 45. All right, let's go 120 first. 120, we got sine of 120 is root 3 over 2. Oh, I'm sorry, we need cosine of 120. Cosine of 120 is negative 1/2. Sine of 120 is root 3 over 2. Okay. Now let's get the sine and cosine of 45. 45, the sine is root 2 over 2. The cosine is also root 2 over 2. Sine is root 2 over 2. Cosine is also root 2 over 2. All right. Now we just got to multiply and subtract. Let's do it. Negative times positive, that's going to be a negative root 2 all over 4. Subtracted by multiplying these two, that's going to be root 6 over 4 is equal to negative root 2 minus root 6 all over 4. Because I already have common denominator, we are done. That's it. Okay. Now let us move on to something else. Let me move on to a couple simplifying problems. So we may not be able to work it all the way out to get a solution here, but we're going to still use these formulas to simplify. Okay. Let's try this one out for size. We're going to simplify it as much as possible. Okay. Just a heads up, during this week's quiz, you're going to have to be able to recognize two things. given, for example, what we just did, which was cosine of 165, how can I break it down? But you're also going to see this. You're also going to see the equation, the formula be used, and then I'm going to give you the right-hand side, and I'm going to ask you, okay, what was I trying to find by giving you this right-hand side? So if I say, oh, cosine 120, cosine 45, minus sine 120, sine 45, what am I trying to find? And then you have to go, oh, okay, so you're subtracting them here, so it's like adding them, so you're trying to find the cosine of 165. So you kind of have to read it backwards too, okay? But as long as you have your formulas in front of you, it should all be doable. All right, so a couple more simplifying ones. So simplify, okay, that's going to be simplified. And we're going to do, how about if I give you something like this? Cosine of x minus pi over 2. Okay, so I just have an x there. I don't actually have a real value there. I can actually plug it in. So simple. Let's look at cosine. Plus or minus. So we're doing subtraction. Since we're doing subtraction for cosine, we're going to be doing the add. Okay. So cosine of x, a, which is the first one, times the cosine of that, cosine of pi over 2. Okay. And then it's going, since it's subtracting here, we're going to use the addition part. Plus the sine of a sine of b. So the sine of a times the sine of that second one. And we just got to work it out. Now, the only thing I really know here is what the sine and cosine of pi over 2 is. So let's take a look at that. Pi over 2, where are we at? Pi over 2, sine is 1, cosine is 0. Sine of pi over 2 is 1. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. Okay? So that's going to give me cosine of x times 0 plus sine of x times 1. Well, anything times 0 is 0. We're done there. So we're just left with 1 times sine of x, which just simplifies to sine of x. You just simplify this whole thing. So the cosine of x minus pi over 2 is just equal to the sine of x. Okay? Simplified, beautifully done. Okay? So you got to be able to do something like that too. Again, plug it in the appropriate formula. All right, one last one if we have time. I'm going to erase this. I apologize. Okay? One last one. All right. Okay. Those of you who don't know Animal Crossing, by the way, I have so many bills saved up. Okay? I'm like a millionaire when it comes to bills now. I've been investing in the turnip market. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm moving on. Okay. Let's move on. Let's try to simplify something like this. Sine of x plus x. Okay. So somewhat similar to the last one, except this time we have x's in both places here. Okay, let's look at that. Simple. Sine of x. So plus, we're going to be using this with the plus, because top is plus, that's plus. So that's sine of x, cosine of the second one, which is b. So cosine of x. I can put these in parentheses. I'm too lazy. Plus cosine of x, sine of x. Okay? So let's take a look at this and really think about, well, what do we have? Sine x, cosine x. And this is essentially also sine x, cosine x. It's written as cosine x, sine x. Same thing. If I told you xy, well, xy is the same thing as y times x. No difference. Sine of x times cosine of x plus cosine of x times cosine of y. Sine of x times cosine of x plus cosine of x sine of x. These two are the same thing. They're like terms. So what happens when we add two like terms? We have one of these and one of these. So now we have two of them. And you can write it in any order. I'm going to write sine x first. You can write it as 2 cosine x sine x instead if you wanted to. Doesn't matter. Generally speaking, we put sine before cosine, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. Okay? So that is equal. And we simplified it. And that's all we can. We can't do anything else. Until we know what x is, we're not going to be able to figure out anything else. So we're done there. Okay? And that's about it for this video. It's running about 15 minutes. Second video I make should be a little bit less than this one. And at the end of the second video, I'll show you guys the homework. I'll give you time so you guys can copy that down. All right? Thanks, guys.